In the early days of Tesla, this is back when Lakshay was in diapers. The debate among Tesla investors was, should Tesla build and operate their own cars, or should they create a platform for everyone else to build their car form factor on top of their infrastructure?
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Scholar AI Founders Pod. Quick reminder to catch us on all the typical podcast locations and find us on our YouTube channel. A lot going on in tech right now. Lakshay CES has just kind of concluded. Lots of cool announcements. I know we want to talk a little bit about NVIDIA making the jump into the automobile space, specifically with a connection with Toyota. They're working on some kind of super processing chips, stepping into robotics. Many people are predicting that this year is going to be a boom in robotics. So let's start there. Lakshay, any thoughts on CES generally, NVIDIA, or any of that?
Yeah, so we've talked about NVIDIA a couple of times on the podcast, just in general, talking about what they're doing, their market, their stock, all sorts of stuff. CES is just a general big tech conference. NVIDIA had a keynote talk, of course, being probably one of the tips of the spears in regards to the hardware space and what's happening in AI and data generally. What was generally pretty interesting is, and they've done this before, and they like teased out these announcements before about bringing their hardware and bringing their simulation tools into more and more physical applications. So they're predicting a really, really big year for robotics. They're predicting really, really big years for simulation technologies. They've released all sorts of stuff that should make synthetic data and like synthetic environment creation easier for ultimately training robotics. The one topic I wanted to poke open that I thought was really, really interesting, at least at a business level, is NVIDIA has announced a partnership with Toyota, probably, hopefully for them, the first of many, where they are trying to make not an open source, but like a partnership-based program for AI driving, where they will start running all the technologies. They'll sell technology, presumably as a license, presumably mixing with some hardware, to these big car companies, these legacy ones like Toyota, like Lexus, whoever have you, like all these companies, that they might all be supplied by NVIDIA rather than, you know, competing to build their own technology or having very limited partnerships. So I figured that was interesting. It's fairly different from the sort of stuff we've been seeing coming from NVIDIA, where I think historically a lot of the focus has been like, what's the biggest chips that we can make? Here's this cool internal research we have. But now they're kind of opening up like what feels like a new product lane.
I want to put forward a thesis, and then I'm going to throw it to you, Shashi, in reaction to this, because one of the things I think that these companies, one of the challenges that I think these companies face, especially as they get to the size of NVIDIA, is number one, they don't have a lot of markets they can enter that are going to make a material impact on their bottom line, right? There's only so many markets you can enter that make a material difference to $1 trillion market cap company. We've seen this challenge kind of play out with Apple, which is what led to a lot of the speculation that Apple was going to be entering automobiles and otherwise, just because of the size of that market. I'm wondering if you think this is a reaction of NVIDIA to, number one, diversify. So make a customer out of people who are not just buying them strictly for AI training and inference. And number two, if you kind of buy my hypothesis that NVIDIA has to go kind of, big game hunting, so to speak. Otherwise, it just simply doesn't matter to their overall bottom line.
What's happening in humanity right now is that semiconductors are the new electrification. We've gone through electrifying most of the world. Now we're adding semiconductors to every part of the world. And NVIDIA is the leader in that. So as a $3.3 trillion company, I don't see this as defensive or reactive in any way. I see this as purely offensive. The market is so much bigger than what NVIDIA is currently serving. NVIDIA could get 10 times bigger. There's just so much room to add compute to every part of life. And that's going to naturally happen, whether it's NVIDIA or whether it's some other company. This is the natural progression of where we're going, is to add compute to everything we're doing. And so NVIDIA sees that opportunity. The big difference between where NVIDIA is today and where Apple is today is NVIDIA is a founder-led company. Founders don't give a blank about these kinds of reactive things that we're talking about of, what are the shareholders going to think? This is about legacy. This is about building the biggest possible future for the world, leaving behind the biggest gift and contribution you can with your limited time on Earth. Jensen gets that. He's purely focused on adding compute and possibilities to everything we're doing. let's go to self-driving. Let's go to autonomous cars. Tesla is the leader. Tesla is the clear leader in autonomous driving. They develop their own hardware. They're vertically integrated. They develop their own software, and they don't need a third party beyond the GPUs themselves to achieve autonomous driving. Every other car company needs NVIDIA. NVIDIA is providing in this new Cosmos model a physical world model in which every other car company can compete in autonomous driving. That's the hardware, that's the infra, that's the tech stack. NVIDIA will provide that backbone that lets the BMWs of the world compete, lets the Mercedes-Benz, the Hondas compete in this world of autonomous driving that without NVIDIA, Tesla will just run away with this market. So really, I think what this is a balance of Tesla's power in the automotive industry.
I think in general, NVIDIA, their CS announcements were basically like, I think part of their like final slide, like part of the thing that they want to underscore and just basically everything they're doing is they want their chips on the edge. Like, of course, like we all know about the 5000 series coming out, like cool, like more performant applications can run. Cool, we can support more data centers with like the Blackwell chips, whatever have you. But the things that stood out to me were generally the edge computing and the places that they're trying to put chips in general, the capacity that they're giving to those chips. So I think the thesis is generally pretty correct. Of this is like the beginning of market grab in what is the real world space, I guess. Like there's just like a bunch of unclaimed market share of we've built very, very fantastic computers. We were previously the providers of that to other companies. Now let's make more exclusive partnerships so that we know that these chips are in many, many places. I think on the topic that you just raised, Shashi, about Tesla versus NVIDIA and what it means for the AI driving space, I think one thing that NVIDIA, I assume, is quite behind on is just the data question of what real world driving is like. Like Tesla's just very, very far along on that. They actually have real reinforcement learning when people hit the brake or choose to accelerate when the car didn't. Whereas NVIDIA is trying to take this highly, highly synthetic data approach. And NVIDIA is like a very, very smart company, right? They've had top researchers for a very, very long time. But I think between robotics, between the AI driving, I'm wondering what it will look like for them to catch up, especially when like they won't be able to get actual real world data outside of like a pretty controlled setting or a controlled simulation setting very, very readily.
I would assume that NVIDIA will get a whole lot of real world data really quickly through some partnerships. And I would imagine car companies are going to see the need and the opportunity to partner with NVIDIA. And NVIDIA will catch up really fast in number of miles because while there are a lot of Teslas out there, there's a lot more of everything else. And if NVIDIA can achieve those partnerships and get their hardware onto some of these platforms, they're going to catch up pretty fast. And we all know they have the tremendous advantage of having everything under the stack and having a leadership edge under the stack. I want to underline, I think that was a really great comment, Lakshay, and I want to underline a couple of points of that. In terms of the edge computing, so one of the announcements that NVIDIA did is for this Project Digits, which is, it's like a Mac Mini. Like, do you remember the really positive reaction everyone had to the Mac Mini release? It was like the one innovative thing Apple did in last year. And they kind of put a whole lot of compute into the really small form factor of the Mac Mini. Project Digits from NVIDIA does essentially the same thing, but for GPU. It's a Blackwell chip, a super chip, and it can handle AI models up to 200 billion parameters inside basically the form factor of a Mac Mini. The price point is expected to be about $3,000. So for that small of a form factor, they're going to get this into the hands of builders on their desktops. That's the objective. And clearly they're working into this edge computing space, as you say. So I completely agree with that. And to just go back to the reference point you said about the last slide. So the real world and kind of robotics and machinery that operates in the physical world is the single biggest market outlined by NVIDIA. That is clearly where they see the biggest opportunity in market cap. We're just so early in this game. We think we're late in this game. We are so early in this game of adding microprocessors and compute capacity to everything in our lives. Cars are sort of, they're very visible and out front, and we're seeing that play out in the market. But everything else is also going to get compute, and And NVIDIA sees particularly robotics as a huge opportunity for them to serve in electrifying and adding compute.
I think just highlighting a couple things. It feels to me like Lakshay is correct in that, as we've talked about before, this Internet of Things, it means kind of augmenting and putting chips on the edges. Automobiles as a market feels like a natural first step into wherever NVIDIA is going. Shashi, I want to kind of kick it back to you with a question, though, because I think you put forth this idea that NVIDIA can catch up simply by partnership of the other car companies. I'm wondering for either of you, and I've got some thoughts, but I want to hear yours first on how many of those cars are actually capable of collecting the types of data that NVIDIA would need to catch up. I mean, if they just retroactively, partnered with Toyota or whomever, how much that data is readily available versus how much they're going to have to provide the infrastructure, build a new car, put new sensors on cars, and then kind of start data gathering that way.
In the early days of Tesla, this is back when Lakshay was in diapers. The debate among Tesla investors was, should Tesla build and operate their own cars, or should they create a platform for everyone else to build their car form factor on top of their infrastructure? So this debate feels like it's now playing out for NVIDIA. It's the same kind of question, but now NVIDIA has no ambition of building their own cars. They're just not interested in being a car company, but they have the opportunity to take the other fork in the road that Tesla didn't take, which is to create the underlying framework infrastructure from which others can build their cars, and they can provide the camera configuration, the software, the self-driving, the integration with variable driving mechanisms, integration with wheel mechanisms, et cetera.
Alex, I'm curious, what do you think? Do you think it's mostly going to be a retroactive action here by NVIDIA, or do you think it's going to be new cars made under this new light of advanced technology, advanced data collection, autonomous driving?
I mean, I think the problem that comes to mind with, for example, like let's take Toyota, right? I have like a 2004 like Toyota 4Runner, right? Like most people drive quite old cars. Like the number of people who buy a new car every year is like the percentage of cars that are new on the road is much lower than the percentage of cars that are quite old. And I think like last 10 years, last 5 years, you can bet that those cars they have cameras, like maybe some of them have LiDAR for like safe cruise control, all that sort of stuff. But being able to label your data, especially when it's like heterogeneous, like it's like all sorts of different types of labels, like some of it's LiDAR, some of it's camera, some of it's like just like motor input, right? I think the thing that's hard for me to get grasp on is, I think if we assume that these new cars are being built in a way that's like NVIDIA platform compatible, then sure, there's data to collect and there's labels to kind of accrue and training sets that can like lead to proper algorithms. I'm not super convinced that you can get away with generative labeling and environments for that sort of thing just yet. I think Tesla's had the benefit of having many, many years of people, again, hitting brakes, communicating their own labels. Like when you disengage autopilot, there's a pop-up that says like, hey, record a little message telling us what went wrong. So the person not only do you get a binary true or false label of like, this drive failed for some reason, you also get someone explaining like what should have happened. And that at least makes for a pretty rich set of training data that comes along with like 17 cameras, like all sorts of like historical time-based input, right? I think the question for NVIDIA's platform is how much data can they get to soon and how quality is that data? And if it's not of a quality level, can like the research teams get like the generative labeling, the generative environments to be of that caliber? NVIDIA does have the kind of background where that second problem is one that they're really good at solving. But for driving, it just feels like it's the first problem of this kind of caliber that a lot of companies are trying to engage with. So there's a lot of unknowns in my opinion.
There's no doubt that NVIDIA is behind Tesla on this. I don't think that's the question. I think the question is how long do they need to catch up?
Yep.
And if that's in the order of months to 1 or 2 years, then it feels like it's just a massive opportunity for NVIDIA. If it's 10 years, it feels like, okay, this is fairly far off an R&D investment. I would argue it's more like the 2 years than the 10 years.
Yep.
I think also there's an interesting angle here, which is looking at it from the other side, like I think that if you're Toyota, you almost need this, right? In the sense that if you think that companies, call it Tesla, call it Uber, call it Waymo, whomever, is going to dominate autonomy, and you're behind and you don't have internal capabilities to build out these systems. Like we've seen other companies have some version of, like Ford has their Blue Cruise, Mercedes has some, kind of semi-autonomous features. BMW has theirs, as you both have alluded to already. I am curious from the kind of legacy car manufacturers' perspective if they also see themselves very quickly losing ground to Tesla, and I wonder if they're the ones kind of beating down NVIDIA's door for this partnership to kind of stave off their own kind of, continuous lagging.
I'm just going to go to a conspiracy theory here. I don't think this is likely, but I think there is a 5% chance that if a company like NVIDIA wanted to be very aggressive and get into this market forcefully, let's say they wanted to not just have a platform, but they wanted to beat Tesla in this self-driving, autonomous driving race. The cost of buying a company that's already got lots of data, let's just say buying General Motors would cost them $55 billion. Buying Mercedes, if they wanted to go for a luxury brand, $55 billion. If they wanted to buy BMW, $48 billion. Right? So these are companies that they can go acquire. That's a tiny fraction of the NVIDIA market cap. Remember, NVIDIA is a $3.3 trillion market cap company. BMW would be a blip on this. So if they wanted to go take the BMW brand and all of the data set that they've acquired, use that as the baseline training data set to teach their self-driving and then create a platform with that, or head-to-head just compete with Tesla on that, both of those become viable for what's a relatively low cost. We've lived in this environment where there's been almost no IPO window in the last several years. There's been almost no large transaction window in the last several years. There are a variety of reasons for that, but we don't need to go into that right now. The fundamental of this is that the expectation is that this will open up in 2025. If that's the case, we should see significant acquisition activity, and this would be a really interesting approach if NVIDIA were going to be really ambitious about this. Again, I'm not predicting that this is the direction NVIDIA would go in, but if Jensen decided, hey, I think we can win cars, whether that's as a platform or as a brand, he could go scoop up one of these established car companies with a lot of data. And again, you don't need LiDAR. So fundamentally, what do you need for self-driving? Elon has been very, very strongly of the opinion you don't need LiDAR, you just need cameras. If that's the case, all of these car companies have had cameras for a long time on these cars.
I wonder, probably deeper than we would like to go here in this episode, but I also think there's an interesting parallel here for Amazon and Rivian, right? And Volkswagen and Rivian. We're seeing these other kind of legacy companies, whether it be tech companies in Amazon or legacy car manufacturers and Volkswagen, partnering with these EV first, data collection, if you want to call them that, company. So I do think there's some interesting for it that maybe will, as you put it, Shashi, continue to kind of wind and unwind as the year progresses. Switching gears a little bit, Lakshay, I want to throw this kind of concept over to you. We've been talking both internally and externally for a while now about this concept of dead internet and this idea that effectively the internet is made up largely already of bots, but an ever-growing fraction of the internet is populated by bots, effectively bots interacting with bots, and that most of the kind of interactions that humans are having on the internet are in fact human to bot and not human to human, as many of us might think. So I want to kind of set the stage for you to just outline what do you think of this kind of dead internet theory? Do you think this is going to become more prominent in 2025? If so, what do you think the consequences might be? How do you see AI kind of playing an instrumental part in that, given that AI is kind of by definition a content generation machine?
Yeah, so just a little bit of history. Dead internet theory precedes the whole AI, like ChatGPT hype wave by a couple of years. It used to be just a pure conspiracy theory where if you were going on Reddit or you were going on Facebook, there's some people who held like a more like properly conspiracy theory belief that when you are going on Reddit and you're seeing other commenters, not a single one of those is human, right? Every post that's made on Reddit, every post that's made on Facebook is made by some kind of bot or machine, basically, and you're the only human on there. The conversation has obviously kind of shifted a lot to this being a little bit true, just given that with ChatGPT, with the companies being born, the amount of focus that goes into content creation as a form of value generation. there is a lot of conversation happening now that I think is very rightfully placed, where dead internet theory seems to be becoming true. The specific instance of this that's a lot more enterprisey and high profile is Meta. In 2023, they announced that they were going to partner with Justin Bieber, with Kendall Jenner, with all these big time celebrities, and make a sort of AI digital clone of them that would have its own profile, would post content on its own, would engage with fans on its own. That never really went anywhere. Users thought it was kind of stupid, so they never really engaged with the fake persona. But Meta has re-kicked up this initiative where they want to basically offload the work from creators of engaging with fans, of creating content, to just say, let us train a clone of you. We will post content on your behalf. We'll post reels on your behalf. We'll engage with users in the comments. And all you have to do is have the personality from which we can extend a digital clone. This goes beyond just a social media conversation. This is just a general thing where even email for most of us is AI slop. Most podcast clips you're even beginning to see, I would bet that a good number of them are the emergence of maybe not now, but in a couple of months, you'll probably see that podcasts posting short form content might just be fully AI generated. And it'll be increasingly hard to tell whether that content is coming from a real person or whether it was just generated from someone prompting a machine that I need a short form TikTok post that looks like XYZ thing. Please get me 100,000 likes and virality. It's a really long conversation. It's a really, really interesting one that's going to lead to a lot of questions, I think, about like what we are expecting to do with social media, just because I think consumption has become a default behavior and the production of that media can really come from anywhere. And I think as people want more and more efficiency coming out of like social media brands, content creation brands, at just a purely like logical level, it makes a lot of sense that a lot of people would lean further and further into AI content generation the more and more convincing it gets. But I think the first question is like, Meta trying to create AI content creators, would that work or not?
I think for me, the thing that I'm most curious about is thinking about this purely from a human perspective. What do we want the internet to be, and why do we use the internet? I think there is a large fraction of humans that use the internet primarily as a means of social engagement for other humans. I think fundamentally that will be lost, even if the facade of I'm interacting with this other person is gone, right? When I view a Reddit post or when I view Wikipedia or when I view anything, I assume as a baseline that was human generated content. Now, I think that default will have to adapt in coming years, and we will need to assume that it probably was written at least in part by some AI. But I do think fundamentally right now the majority of people are believing the content that they digest from the internet is at least of human origin in some capacity. I do think that there will be, even if this kind of quote unquote dead internet becomes the majority, and if the majority of things we are interacting with online are generated by computers, bots, or otherwise, I do think there will be specific carve outs in the form of companionship, in the form of social media, social engagement that need a human element in order to be successful. Time will tell whether that's true or not. I think that for those of us that are looking for purely information, in some ways we can be agnostic of the source, so long as it's accurate, so long as it is truthful, so long as it exists in reality. It doesn't actually matter if it was generated by ChatGPT or a work colleague, right, in the form of an email or something like that. That's totally fine. But if we're looking for real companionship, and the thing that even in the form of peer-to-peer relationships, right? If I'm a fan of celebrity X, and I think that by engaging with them on their Meta profile on Facebook or Instagram or otherwise is authentic, and then I think that, and all of a sudden I come to find that isn't, and it's in fact kind of an AI clone of them, that to me feels like it loses some of the value and some of the value proposition that people have kind of bought into it for. Shashi, I'm interested of your thoughts here.
I agree with what you were saying, Damon. I think humans have a great ability to sense genuine connection and genuine interaction. And I think we seek that out. I think the popularity of podcasts, the popularity of YouTube as a platform is essentially the expression of this idea that humans seek genuine, authentic human expression and ideas and interaction. And we swim through the slop of noise, whether that's email or Reddit or whatever to try to find these nuggets of actual genuine idea, thought, interaction, storytelling. From the olden days, 2016, 2017, this idea of dead internet is always struck me as kind of a midwit idea. Like the mids of the world would probably say like the earth is flat because I can't see the curve, and the internet's all fake because I don't know who these people are. And, it just seems like a very mid idea. But I think that going forward, our assumption base should be different, which is that a lot of this content will be generated by bots. We've seen that Meta particularly has changed policies pretty drastically over the years about this. I think they've always had this oscillation between commercial success and creating genuine relationships and interaction. And so we're seeing how Meta plays out in this. Meta is a monopoly. It's a monopoly of social media companies. And it will be interesting to see how that plays out as well, because as the owners of Instagram and WhatsApp, they have a really dominant position in the ways we communicate with each other on the web. And so whether that ends up becoming a problem, that they have a unified policy across those platforms, or whether they allow those platforms to have their own specific policies on bots and artificial content versus genuine human interaction, will be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think Meta in general has been I think they've very much played by their own rules, or creating their own rules about like what is correct versus not for a very long time. And the two things that forced them up into behaving according to someone else's plan has been EU regulations, and it's been Apple regulations, like platform mobile regulations, versus governmental ones in the EU, just because the EU is generally stricter. And we haven't seen a lot of conversation from either side on what is kind of allowed with like AI mimicry. Of course, EU has a lot of regulations on what happens with data and who collects what and where it's collected. But that's very different from a government defining like what is a healthy sort of engagement level with social media. As like, for example, I can imagine that something that might happen pretty soonish in like the next year, perhaps, is we might see an instance of a influencer who has a known brand, has a very authentic profile, and in general posts content of themselves that's authentically recorded. It's their own editors. It's like actual people putting in like human effort to make the content. And we might see like a one-off instance of them taking a static post, which is like promoting a Red Bull or a Gillette of the world, that is an AI generated bit of content. I think the problem, or I guess the difficulty to run into very specifically, is people are able to identify authentic to very, very varying levels. So insofar as that, the moment one person catches on and says like, wait a second, that looks AI generated, and the word spreads, then the brand is tanked, right? But until then, I think increasingly so, it's proving quite hard to detect an AI generated piece of media. I think especially if you focus on text and static image, you can get away with a lot. I think the question of like how you choose to label authentic no longer comes down to like a human detecting it. You have to come back to like a regulatory requirement to like mark content as AI generated. And it doesn't seem to me like Facebook would be the sort of group to publicize that very readily, or to make an effort to cover that the correct way, if that makes sense.
We talked about this several times, but I don't see it playing out in the form of regulation. I see it playing out, I think, towards a similar goal, but an alternative solution, which is blockchain or similar. Meaning that if I'm a creator, if I am, an influencer, if I am anyone, celebrity, myself, doesn't matter. I'm going to need to certify any content that I'm actually going to distribute out on the internet, and put qualifiers on that certified content of, was this used with the aid? Or was it created with the aid of AI? Was this created completely by AI? Was this created completely by human? And I think that's probably the only way you get to the bottom of being able to trace source back to creator, and then, create some sort of trustworthy system in which people are going to be able to label these things as aided by AI, completely generated by AI, or completely generated by humans, and allow the humans to kind of choose for themselves what they want to interact with. I think that the brighter spots of that internet thing is that I do think we are headed pretty soon, call it a year, call it 2 years, whatever, towards a reality in which we do all have AI agents working on our behalf in some manner, right? And if I need to return a Christmas present that didn't fit, right, or return, something that I didn't like or something like that, I don't necessarily need to talk to a human being at one of these companies, nor do one of those humans at one of those companies need to talk to me. That's a perfectly fine use case in which kind of quote unquote dead internet, a bot talking to a bot makes a lot of sense. Similarly, if I'm booking a flight or booking a hotel, there are times when speaking to a person isn't really important so long as everything is working correctly. The social media aspect of this becomes very strange to me, in truth. I just don't know. I think what fundamentally you kind of start asking the question of, is the social part of social media important or not? Or is this purely for entertainment, right? I think that we may have seen this play out a little bit in the earliest days of video games, in which engagement for video games goes through the roof as soon as you introduce multiplayer video games, right? There is no real reason why a video game would need to be multiplayer. All of the friends, all of the compatriots, all of the people that you are collaborating with in a video game could be synthetic. They could be AI generated, It could be computer generated, etc. There is no reason that you need to play a video game with a different human. Yet again, as Shashi was saying, we seek that level of interaction, that level of kind of companionship. And I think that just enriches the experience. I don't really know that I believe that if people come to an understanding that social media companies are being run by bots for the consumption of humans, if that has very much staying power. I'm wondering, let's say, in the context of discussing this, how you think about our place as somebody who is building AI technologies in trying to do that. I mean, does it concern you at all that we are in some ways contributing to AI generated content? Now, albeit text, not images, not for the sake of, confusing or trying to fool anybody. But I mean, we are at the end of the day delivering a service that is AI powered. I'm wondering how you see maybe responsibility of people like us who are building these technologies as it pertains to this dead internet.
There was actually a conversation for a while. So a lot of my friends, they're like grad students or they're finishing up PhDs. And so the topic of like, especially when Scholar AI, like as a product, it's very focused on delivering paper and academic material. And with ChatGPT, you run into this specific problem where people are using ChatGPT to write. That's a known thing. And you run into this sort of self-reinforcing dialogue problem where if you are using ChatGPT to find papers, search for papers, and then write your papers, you're ending with a sort of like reinforcing loop where the content being found is biased by the same LM. So people are generally finding the same content for the same sort of questions, and they're generally writing about that content the same way. And the next iteration of that topic, a lot of the next advancements of those ideas are all written by what feels like the same author with the same perspective and same ideas on things. So it kind of perpetuates this like almost like cementing of what at the time the LLMs thought is the correct way to speak about a given topic, right? I think in general, we've seen a bunch of companies pitch, like Microsoft is really, really bullish on the whole idea about like AI agents and what's happening to the future of like the enterprise software case. I do think that there are a lot of questions to ask, mostly at the consumer level, where I think in general, for a big company, a consumer marketplace is one of the best things you can make, right? If you're in the economy of keeping people's attention on your app screen and then having them make purchasing decisions, having them like execute buys, react to ads on your platform, that's very, very high revenue upside. I think the thing that I think a lot about is I think that's going to continue to stay. I think that persists for eternity for as long as like technology companies exist. Like the advertisement marketplace relationship will continue to exist and it'll just be optimized for whatever the current platform is. I think the question that stands is for young people, especially, we're seeing like growing interest in like being more on the production side, like making content, like putting yourself out there, putting your own brand out there, creating your own sort of like self-image and putting it on the internet. I think you lose a lot and you create a lot of danger for like what is the quote unquote attention economy if the creator marketplace and what that idea is allowed to kind of go unfiltered. I think like you could do we've always seen like the like statistical average attention span is going way down. The occurrences of myopia from just like screen time exposure are way up. In general, it's not super well designed for like what is healthy human living, but it's very easy to, because these things are engineered to be a little bit addictive, to be engineered to be keeping your eyes on a screen for as long as humanly possible. So I think like as a company that I'm at least biased to building consumer and we're building an AI space, I think I look at it as trying to build information scraping systems is currently to our benefit. But I think the question of how you produce AI content that's aligned to human health in general is a really hard question, because it runs the same vulnerabilities that like Facebook has built their entire revenue model off of, that Google has built their entire revenue model off of. And in general, the tech industry is biased a little bit towards farm dollars and data until you can show the best ad possible and get people clicking.
This is an interesting segue as well, because, and maybe a topic for future episodes, but we haven't yet seen ads directly injected into AI-generated content in the traditional form. But there are kind of some early indications that Perplexity and possibly others may be workshopping that or beta testing that already. And so I do think we are headed for the days of AI-generated content infused with ads or promotions as well.
Mm-hmm. Didn't I know someone in this group sent a Twitter like post of Perplexity ads. Was that official? Like that was official?
So that was me that sent it out. I did see it. It came across my feed a number of times. I don't know firsthand. I am not an avid user of Perplexity. I do use it occasionally, but I don't use it every day. I have not personally seen ads in Perplexity, but that account is, for all that they can be a verified account. And so I do think they are probably rolling it out in some small beta use cases, maybe only to select users. Maybe they're testing it out, seeing what the public reaction would be. That's probably how I would handle it if I were Perplexity as well. So that would be my best guess, but I don't know that. That's not confirmed.
I see. Yeah, it's just tough. I kind of hope that there's like I look at like cyberpunk media a lot. It's like Blade Runner 2049, like Cyberpunk 2077, the game. Like all of those science fictional like settings kind of are basically oriented around that, like the more and more you make humans the product, the more and more you kind of put yourself into like what that whole of that setting is. And increasingly, like we've already had this sort of data problem where basically like Google wants your data, Facebook wants your data. Everybody's just competing for what your data is. And if you don't participate in that, like you basically lose out on like what modern social interaction is, right? If you try to stay away from that, like you're just texting people, like you're not keeping up with your friends, whatever. And increasingly, like stuff has been pushed more and more to just like be AI slop. Like I know people where they refuse to like read their email just because they get like in a business setting, they don't really use email to communicate with like their partners, because so much of it is just like some email machine scrape my email and just blasting the hell out of my account with like updates about some XYZ thing I don't care about, right? And the amount of AI slop that's out there in the world is just going to go up way more quickly, especially as more and more folks are making tools to generate slop. How do you solve that? How do you not end up in Cyberpunk 2077? I don't know. I don't want to.
I want to expand on agents for a second and the creator economy. I think that the generation in their 20s and early 30s now, the shine of working for a Google or a Microsoft for 20 years is just largely gone. And I think that the independence and self-directed nature of working on your own projects is much more appealing to this generation than it was to my generation. And I think the agent world that is emerging will help enable a lot of people to be solopreneurs or small team entrepreneurs in a way that will continue this current trend, continue to support really smart people deciding, I can do this project on my own. I don't need to work for a Google. I can have a lot of fun and have self-direction and I'm willing to take the wins and losses, and I'm willing to use the latest tech to help me with go-to-market, to help me with lead generation, to help me with CRM, to help me with follow-up. All of the time-consuming, tedious tasks that used to be overwhelming and burdensome 20 years ago in building a company. Trust me, I was there. Many of those things should be now much, much more easily done by a solopreneur or small team of entrepreneurs than was even feasible. And one of the reasons you needed to raise so much money, or you needed to wait so long to build a material company 20, 25 years ago, is because you had so many of these tedious tasks to get done. And in today's market with agents available, that trend, I think, will continue. And I think you'll continue to see really great, talented young people like you guys decide, I don't need to go work for the man. I can do my own thing. I can have fun. I don't need to have a boss. And I'm willing to go on my own. And the tech will be completely supportive of that.
Like, fascinating spot to pick up on next time, the role of kind of AI agents in the entrepreneur ecosystem. Are we going to see larger companies formed by smaller and smaller teams? I think the answer is yes. I think you laid a very nice preamble there that we can pick up on next time. So we'll cut it there. Thanks everybody for joining us for this week's episode of the Scholar AI Founders Pod. Remind us to catch us next week at all your typical podcast locations and find us on our YouTube channel. Thanks, and see you all next time.